We're continuing on Chapter 17 of The Ultimate Evil by Maury. Sam speaks. In mid-November, with Justice Ernst Rosenberger presiding, Jim Midigar's trial opened at State Supreme Court in Brooklyn. The jury would be asked to determine his guilt on two charges: bribery and rewarding official misconduct. Conviction could result in a 7-year prison term for the despairing reporter, whose bylines continued to appear on the numerous 44 articles being published in Westchester. On November 14th, as the legal proceedings unfolded, Berkowitz wrote a letter to AP reporter Rick Piniak. Piniak had thus far been frustrated by the reopened case, finding himself mainly restricted to sending out dispatches based on our work or on what little he could glean from Santucci's office. Since his original statement, in which he credited the newspaper reports for having spurred his entry into the case, Santucci had been publicly silent. This irritated some journalists who were reliant on the DA's office because they had nowhere else to turn for material. Piniak also wanted something to publish, and when he received Berkowitz's letter, his sky brightened. In it, Berkowitz confirmed the cult's existence and said, 2 years have elapsed, and only recently have they, whoever they are, begun to find hidden meanings in those original letters. I have to give these people credit. Berkowitz told Piniak about the Arliss Perry murder and emphasized that neither her nor John Carr was responsible, which deepened the mystery. We knew Berkowitz wasn't even in the cult at the time, but Carr had been an early suspect. Berkowitz, in fact, told Piniak that the Perry case was very deep and suggested that Lee Chase could help him out with it and the 44 probe. He also said that although he was indirectly aiding the Son of Sam investigation, he wouldn't give up names of accomplices to Piniak or anyone else. It isn't for my sake, but for my family's. My father comes first. Then again, he has been encouraging me to talk. However, he has no idea of the dangers involved, the dangers to him. Next, Berkowitz wrote Chase and recommended that she cooperate with Piniak, digressing from the business at hand. Berkowitz offered another observation. Many housewives need new vibrators. These little buzzing contraptions would certainly keep them occupied with other things than parading outside Kings County Hospital and demanding the execution of SOS, Son of Sam. This happened, by the way, 100 or so marchers, 99% housewives, all screaming for my head and being led by that dreadful Mrs. Moskowitz boy. Speaking of self-righteous sexual frustration, I know that court-appointed psychiatrist Abrahamson and Sigmund Freud would have had a ball analyzing them all. 2 days later, on the 21st, Berkowitz's cynical humor gave way to panic. Well, now you did it. He wrote Chase, "Oh man, you will never guess who dropped in for a surprise visit today. They came from the West Coast. Hint, they got a funny letter from Louisiana. Hint, they're from California." Well, who could they be? UFOs? No, damn it, you know who. That's right, I kid you not. If you can recall, I asked you to send nothing, but you mailed your little Sacramento Bee clipping about Arliss anyhow. Naturally, along with the letter to Badlands, North Dakota, they assumed the letter was from me. Damn, I got blamed for it. This is the honest-to-God truth. And now my ribbon is acting up again, my typewriter ribbon. The words began to fade on the paper. Berkowitz was in a quandary. The Santa Clara boys screamed they wasted the taxpayers' money. I guess they're on their budget thing out west, too, like in New York. They've taken away the cop cars and given them bicycles, saving on gas. Oh, great. Now these guys are so pissed that they'll never bother to pay attention again. I just knew something like this was going to happen. I just knew it. All these inquiries about Miss P, all these little tips, the strange phone call, an anonymous call from Chase to Gardner, crazy letters, curious, Mr. Gilroy. Of course, it was only a matter of time before their curiosity was aroused. What did you expect? They don't fool around with murder. This is serious business and someone could get hurt. Look, I'm not mad, but I would like to pinch your butt. Oh, but it would be a nice pinch. You'll like it. Anyhow, now what do I do? Of course, I refuse to talk with them. Berkowitz was mistaken. The Santa Clara Sheriff's detectives, Ken Kahn and Tom Beck, hadn't showed up at Attica yet, but they did phone there and ask to speak to Berkowitz. When the message was delivered to him, he thought they were in the visitors' center and refused to come out. The crisis was momentarily averted. On the night before Thanksgiving, the Brooklyn jury acquitted Jim Mitigar of all charges. Bursting with jubilation, he called me from a phone in the hallway outside the courtroom. "This is the best Thanksgiving I'm ever going to have," he exclaimed. "Thank God for you that it's over," I said. "I was in touch with Marianne Roche at the Times today. She said that Joe Fried was out there covering it for them and was phoning in reports. I know she wishes you well, too. She was nervous about it all day. Remember, she was there the first time we spoke to Cecilia Davis in Brooklyn." "Yeah," Jim said, "and Joe is here. He's writing the story for tomorrow's Times." "Go home and take Carol out for a few drinks," I suggested. "You've been through hell." "I'm on my way," Jim shouted. "Happy Thanksgiving. I feel like I've been born again." The next day's New York Times reporter Joe Fried wrote an account of the acquittal in the post-Mitigar bribery trial. In compiling the article, he solicited comments from members of the jury. One speaking for the panel told him in a statement the Times published, the wrong defendant was on trial. The feeling was that the Post should have been on trial. Berkowitz, who felt ambivalent toward Mitigar, had no reaction to the exoneration. He had bigger troubles to deal with. In late November, Rick Piniak flew out west to meet with Lee Chase and returned by way of Minot, where he spoke to Gardner. While with Chase, Piniak obtained copies of some of Berkowitz's letters. Through Chase, word got back to Berkowitz, and Piniak was pursuing a theory that Berkowitz and others in the group were homosexuals. Berkowitz had seen the latent homosexuality reference in our article about the cult, but he hadn't reacted badly because the comment wasn't specific. However, he believed Piniak was about to be very specific. "I only want to assure you in this matter Piniak is incorrect." Berkowitz wrote to Chase. "However, I have met some of these strange persons in various circles, the cult, that I circulated. But I never did it with them. No way. This isn't for me. Matter of fact, plenty of straight women are present too. This was a major revelation. Probably more women than men." Muff. Nuff said. Now, of course, you must correct Uncle Rick in this matter. If you don't, then I'm dead. The reason I'm in prison, he isn't. Neither you nor he have no knowledge whatsoever of how the prison gossip system works. It doesn't matter if a certain rumor isn't true. Here there is no justice. Should the inmates believe this, they will believe it because they want to. Then I will be dead within a week. In prison, a man survives by his masculinity, so please straighten him out once and for all. Him and Maury Terry. Berkowitz then talked about his inability to turn state's evidence. I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't want to. I can do it, but I don't want to. I'm in a predicament here where I cannot talk with the press or police. Let a rumor begin that I am a stool pigeon, and I'm just as dead if I was one of those strange ones. Comprende? I sure hope you do, because I'm in a dangerous situation. Nobody here hates a strange one, tool pigeon, or sex freak more than anything imaginable. I think I just said this wrong. What I mean to say is that those three I just mentioned are hated so very much that they are in constant danger. Again, I'm not any of these, but I can't let others think I am. Berkowitz then switched subjects. Please read attachment letters and give me an opinion. I will await your advice. Also, please don't return the letters. Terry is the guy who wrote those stories which you have in your possession now. The articles sent to Berkowitz by Denise were read by him and then forwarded to Chase. I finally had established contact with Berkowitz. Gardner, who was now on his mailing list, sent me his own letter to Berkowitz, and I enclosed mine in the envelope. I got through. It got through. In it, I simply told Berkowitz that I'd been at Marcy, composed the conspiracy question he asked that day, and was working the case since the day of his arrest. Chase later wrote to him to encourage his correspondence with me, that he needed it. His anger at Rick Piniak was suddenly boiling over. Shit, he wrote Chase on November 26th. You'll see now how I am trying to indirectly help others learn truth about all of this. Yes, I am now a victim again, the victim of stupid investigators who know nothing of the occult or whatever they decided to call these weirdos. Here I am trying to help others, and Satan has pulled out his weapon, his secret weapon, should I decide to help Rick or others like him. And now this crazy Rick is going with his strange desires theory. Should I talk with anyone, Rick, Terry, Midigar, Gardner, Santucci, about this occult involvement? Then out comes this strange theory, which wouldn't sound like a theory in print. Then, after this nonsense circulates, I'd be dead in no time. If not dead, then I'd be a man most miserable. I'll be joked at and laughed at by all the other inmates. What goddamned motherfucking fools these investigators are. What stupid fucks. Meaning, well, they will destroy the very one that is helping them in the first place. It is I who is leaving many of the clues. They want clues, yet they are killing me at the same time. What idiots. Berkowitz then said he was thinking of writing to the media to say, these investigators are foolish and crazy. The investigation will eventually stop because of the lack of further materials, and that will be that. No more investigation, no more stupid rumors or stupid fools to spread them. Like the usual, Satan will again be the victor. To suggest Berkowitz was somewhat distressed with Piniak would be akin to labeling World War II a water pistol fight, and he wasn't finished. The next day, November 22nd, he was assailing the AP reporter again. The blind fool is working on this strange desires theory without the slightest bit of evidence. All guesswork. Blind fools trying to logically figure out why all this conspiracy came about. The pervert. It's his mind that's dirty. Lee, I know just what's going to happen. It's the same old story with the New York Post and Daily News. These two have screwed up every story they ever got on my case. They are the most sensational and ugly, also inaccurate newspapers in the world. I know just what they will do. I can see the sensational headlines. Even though it isn't true, it certainly made a good and spicy story, which is all the 8 million perverts in New York City want to hear. None of these tabloids are the least bit concerned with accuracy. Disgusting bastards. I had sensed something was wrong with when my father wrote me this huge letter and pleaded with me to ice up. It was so weird because the week before he had asked me to cooperate so that I could perhaps get a reduction in sentence. This, of course, wasn't my purpose. I was going to leave this investigation up to the others. To get what my father wanted, I would have to go over to the finest detail every single event, every single detail about the victims, the crimes, my part, etc. No way. I'm not going back down to New York shackled in chains and paraded from courthouse to courthouse and county to county. I'm not going to be paraded around in front of dozens of reporters and the victims' families. Yes, I see what weapons Satan has in store for me should this thing really get moving. I can see the horrors await me as I try to explain to my friends here about this homo headline. I'm not going to be giggled at and catcalled at as if I were a girl. This is what will happen. Yet it would all be over some stupid homosexual theory. Berkowitz did confirm that some of the group members were homosexuals. His gripe was that he would be lumped in with them. The confirmation was a valuable one, giving us more to work with on Howard Weiss, Michael Carr, and others. Now, 2 women emerged as suspects. On December 4th, Rick Piniak and I met in Yonkers, where we discussed the case at length. He agreed to join forces and cooperate, but the next day he would tell Chase not to deal with anyone but him. During the meeting, Piniak offered a reason for his willingness to work with me. You've been in this from the beginning. Everyone says you must have had hot information to get in so early and stay there. Nobody but us has a chance at this. If the Times can't get the story all by themselves, they'll stay out of it. The news is embarrassed because they gave a reward to the Carrs and because Breslin wrote that ridiculous fiction about the case and the Post is covering it, but they have no information and don't know which way to turn. That leaves you and me, he said. No, it didn't. It left me unknown to both of us that night that Berkowitz-Chase alliance was about to sever Piniak from the investigation. The next morning, Piniak told Chase not to provide any information to Gardner, me, or Santucci. Chase promptly mailed a note to Gardner in Minot, who was considering a trip to her home. Right after I talked to you about coming out here this weekend, she wrote, I called Rick Piniak with the AP, and he was very critical of me, almost called me a fool, and made it clear that I was at least a traitor to David. He had me bitterly crying when I slammed the phone down on the hook and called the phone company for a disconnect immediately. Chase reported this incident to Berkowitz and then wrote to Piniak telling him her phone and postal box numbers were changed and she was out of the case. She wasn't, of course. But in the short span of 3 weeks, Piniak had managed to completely alienate both herself and Berkowitz. Berkowitz wrote Chase the next week saying he'd heard from Piniak again, and the letter indicates he is a phony. Piniak was not happy with the turn of events. He became bitter towards Berkowitz and Chase and began to downplay the thrust of the entire investigation. However, he would be heard from again. In 1982, he would be involved in an article which nearly had a disastrous effect on the probe. Piniak's participation soured Berkowitz to a considerable degree, and Berkowitz was even more angered by the fact that he himself had originally judged the reporter to be trustworthy. But there was yet another dark cloud on the horizon. As the Queen's District Attorney's Office ventured into a different piece of uncharted risky ground, Berkowitz's stepsister Anne, the daughter of his adopted father's second wife, had experienced some personal difficulties of her own in life. The DA's investigation heard about Anne from several of Berkowitz's friends who told them, among other things, that Berkowitz and at one time had a close association with her. For that and other considerations, Herb Leifer and company decided to find Anne, who was said to be living in a California commune. The investigators had legitimate reasons at the time to be interested in Anne, but apparently no one in Queens considered just how such an inquiry would be received by Nat Berkowitz and his wife, Julia, Anne's mother. The elder Berkowitz had been urging David to cooperate with Santucci, but after he heard that Julia's daughter was being sought for questioning, he changed his mind, or Julia did. Nat wrote Nat wrote to David and asked him to cool his heels. His father's pressure on him was strong, along with the Piniac fiasco. Berkowitz's desire to help the investigation was suddenly being severely tested. There was, it would turn out, no evidence linking Anne to the case. But again, the damage had been done. Regarding his father's change of heart, Berkowitz wrote, "My father is dying to see this stuff," the Gannett articles. "He is curious to see what this is all about. First he says, cooperate, cooperate, cooperate. Now he is saying, silence, silence, silence. I'm just confused by everything. You ought to see the letter he sent me. 8 full pages using every inch of paper to write on. There's hardly any white visible, only blue ink, so I've got to give him some answers soon." Berkowitz was just a few days away from learning that Anne was being sought for questioning. The letter he referred to here didn't mention Anne as a prime reason for his father's about-face. But before that could happen, the roof collapsed from another weight. Since I first became aware of the intrigue of Attica, I had but 2 goals in mind. First, to establish my own communication with Berkowitz, and second, to do whatever I could to ensure the precarious situation wasn't sabotaged, intentionally or innocently, by other parties. Along those lines, I recommended that Queens not approach Berkowitz's friend Denise, whom I knew was high-strung and likely to panic. And knowing how close Berkowitz was to Lee Chase, I also convinced the DA's office to let her be. I didn't know Piniac had visited her until he returned. Not that he would have listened to my suggestion anyways. Queens knew of the potential relevance of the Berkowitz's stepsister Anne before I did, so there was nothing I could have done to avert the situation. But I had known what I have recommended, that Anne be left out of the picture, temporarily at least. I myself had made a mistake in November when I encouraged Gardner to publicize the packet of clues he received from Berkowitz. Fortunately, Berkowitz was more annoyed with the Post's treatment of the story than he was that it became public. But I wasn't going to recommend any further publicity about the Attica situation for quite some time. We had enough material to publish as it was. It was far better to allow Berkowitz to play his cards unencumbered. If push eventually came to shove, fine. But as I saw the situation, the day was a long way off before Anne and Piniac incidents occurred. And then there was the matter of the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department. Both Gardner and I advised those detectives to let us negotiate the Arliss Perry matter through with Berkowitz. And he knew who we were and had expressed stately he was against Lee Chase's sending any material to California. Arliss had been dead 5 years, Gardner said. It hasn't been solved in all that time. Another few months won't hurt. But nobody listened. First, after delaying a few weeks, the California detectives phoned Attica, and Berkowitz refused to speak with them. Even at that, they didn't decide that perhaps Gardner and I knew what we were talking about. Santucci's investigators also joined with us and strongly opposed any Santa Clara contact with Berkowitz, but it was to be no avail. On December 3rd, the night before I met with Rick Piniac, I received a call at 9 p.m. It was Detective Sergeant Ken Kahn of the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department. "What are your plans for tomorrow?" he asked. "Work during the day, and I'm supposed to meet somebody at 6 tomorrow night." "Why? What's up?" I had some water. "We're in New York, and we'd like to get together with you if we could." It took a minute for that to sink in. Kahn and his partner, Tom Beck, were calling from a Holiday Inn near Kennedy Airport in Queens. "Does Santucci know you're in town?" No, we just flew down from Buffalo, Attica. Wait, you didn't. I'm afraid we did, Khan said slowly. Khan explained that Berkowitz initially refused to talk with them, but then felt sorry they'd come such a distance and agreed to acknowledge their presence. He told them that he feared for his father's life, that he had to exist in prison and couldn't be considered an informer, and that inmates would kill him if he was seen talking to the cops. He also said he knew Lee Chase sent news clips to Santa Clara without his permission. He told us he wasn't lying about the Arliss murder, that he knew who did it and why, but wouldn't give up any names. Khan said he told us that some state college in Bismarck would provide a key to the solution. Here, Khan was mistaken. The police assumed Berkowitz meant Bismarck Junior College, which Arliss attended. Only later, when replaying the tape, did they realize he mentioned another school, Maury College. We're convinced that he knows about the killing, Khan added. You were right. He was very sincere. He said he met the killer, or one of them, at a cult meeting in New York, but that's all he'd give us. Berkowitz had already written to Chase about where he met one of the killers, so this wasn't news. The information about the college was new. However, although Berkowitz had hinted about the school in his letters, the important outcome of this meeting was that the Santa Clara detectives saw for themselves that Berkowitz was leveling with those involved in the case, but there was to be a big price to pay for his first-hand assessment of the Son of Sam. He's going to write to you and Felix Gilroy and says he's through with all of this, Khan said. I warned you guys, and so did Gardner, I insisted. Berkowitz told you everything about his fears, the same things we told you. Yes, Khan acknowledged. He wasn't at all what we'd thought he'd be like. He was friendly but elusive. He said goodbye with a firm handshake and said he couldn't help anyone. I told Khan that I'd rearrange my schedule and meet him and Beck the next day. Then I called Tom McCarthy at home and filled him in on what happened. McCarthy was dismayed. I next reached Gardner in Minot and asked him to send a letter to Berkowitz saying that we had nothing to do with the surprise visit and had recommended against it. The next morning, Queen's Assistant District Attorney Mike Arimenti called to tell me Khan and Beck were at the DA's office at that moment. I walked out with them. He said, George Bird is also furious, and so was the boss, Santucci. I'm sick and tired of people not listening when we tell them we know how Berkowitz is going to react, I said. And goddamned Berkowitz tells them he blames me and Gilroy for this. We had nothing to do with it. I was trying to keep them the hell away from there. They couldn't resist coming to meet the infamous Son of Sam face to face, Arimenti fumed. This is all screwed up now. He'll not only back away on Arliss, he'll back away on everything. Apparently finding the Queen's climate somewhat frosty, Khan and Beck flew back to California without calling me, and I met Piniak as scheduled, but didn't tell him what happened. It would be a month before I'd talk to Khan again. In time, as the waters calmed, Khan would become an ally to the investigation. He and Beck are good detectives, but that day, undoubtedly, at the urgings of their own superiors, they were party to a considerable gaffe. As mentioned earlier, there were enough miscalculations to go around in this case. The Santa Clara Sheriff's Department couldn't claim sole possession of that tarnished crown. Berkowitz was nearly done. He wrote to tell Chase that he was unable to trust anyone but his father and would follow Nat, Berkowitz's advice, and remain silent. He said he also heard that Santucci's office wanted to reach his stepsister and came down hard on Chase for sending the clippings to Santa Clara. But Lee Chase, to her credit, didn't give up. She pleaded with Berkowitz to contact me, telling him it was I who had developed the information in the first place and that I had nothing to do with the Piniac, Anne, and Santa Clara situations. And Berkowitz, despite the immense pressure on him, listened to Chase. He would give it one final try. The letter was dated January 12, 1980. Dear Maury, yesterday I mailed you a correspondence form. All you have to do is sign it and send it back. Well, I guess it would be okay for us to communicate further. I am agreeing to do this, but within reason. Also, I do not wish a visit at this time. I cannot go into details on this. Thank you for the article, enclosed the letter. It was the October 26th story saying Berkowitz refused to cooperate with Santucci. It was only recently that I had an opportunity to read the articles you wrote, because no one from the Westchester area is watching out for me. I didn't learn of these articles immediately, but now I've accumulated several clippings thanks to my friend Denise. As for my letter to Mr. Gardner, which found its way into the newspapers, it wasn't so much that the letter became public. This really didn't bother me. The thing that really upset me was the nonsensical way it was presented. I threw out the New York Post article long ago, but I remember those sensational headlines quite well. So this brings me to another important matter. Maury, I can say by these clippings that you have quoted me often, but why do you keep quoting me? I mean, I'm supposed to be deranged, crazy, insane, and a madman. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Honestly, how do you expect people to believe you when you mention something I was supposed to have said? Look, you cannot build a building without laying the foundation first. So if you're trying to use me as a source of facts and information, then you'll only be wasting everybody's time. Nobody will believe me or you because I have no credibility. What does the public think when they see my name mentioned somewhere? What does the public, the ones you seem to be trying to convince, see when they view my picture or something? I'll tell you what they think. They think I'm just a crazy madman. What do you see? I tell you what they see. I'll tell you what they see. They see those odd scrawls on the wall of my apartment. They think and see in their own minds a sick madman who hears voices of destruction and hears barking dogs which tell him to kill. Maury, the public will never ever truly believe you, no matter how well your evidence is presented. They will never believe you unless you first convince the public that I was sane all along. This is really the foundation of your arguments. The first question people want to know is one of insanity. If they think me insane, then what good will your articles be? Obviously, this question must be answered first before you begin any investigation in which you are trying to use my words as a reliable source. Maury, I will tell you now and quite personally that all the things which people saw, the strange writing on the wall, the topsy-turvy apartment with the letters and books scattered about, the broken wall, etc., this you see, was all by deliberate design. It was a deliberate act. It was set up this way by a means of feigning its insanity. But this is only part of the story, yet I will take the responsibility here and admit that I am in no way insane, nor was I ever insane. The broken wall of my apartment was only knocked in several days before I got arrested. I'm quite certain that any police detectives will confirm to you that there were still numerous pieces of plaster chips on my rug below the hole. As for the scrawls on the wall, bizarre ravings about Sam Carr and Craig Glassman, if I recall correctly, they were done in red magic marker, but if you notice, all those markings were very much alike. Why? because they were only written on the wall at the same time, several days before my arrest. The apartment was the same way in general. The books, magazines, pornographic literature, etc., was left scattered topsy-turvy about my floor only days before my arrest. I never had very much furniture, but within a week before I was arrested I threw out several good pieces I had. The furniture was loaded into a small van and disposed in front of the Salvation Army warehouse on Columbus Avenue, Route 22 in Mount Vernon. Early one morning, and a few hours before the building opened, the furniture was placed near the front of the building. All of this may seem unimportant to many and may be unimportant to you. However, this clearly points to advanced planning and, of course, sanity. Let me also add that no one from the public, police, or prosecutor's office knows this. Even if the police found out, all they could do is shake their fists at me and laugh at my being clever. But it was never my idea, and I'm certain you know this. So unless you could first convince the general public that I am a sane, rational person, then those articles you continue to write would amount to nothing. Every time you quote me, every time you say Berkowitz said this, Berkowitz said that, it would mean very little and have no credibility. My recommendation would be to prove to the general public that I was always sane. How do you do this? I don't really know, but surely this would be helpful to you. Furthermore, I would kindly ask you not to inform anybody except your close associates that we are corresponding. If you mention anything from the above, say it came from another source and not me, this would be beneficial to both of us. Sincerely, David Berkowitz. It was a remarkable letter, and it was specific. There were numerous statements which could be confirmed from the details Berkowitz provided, and he knew it. But first I wanted more information. Writing back in a word substitution code to elude the notice of the prison censors who opened his incoming mail, I asked Berkowitz some questions about the van rental and other matters. I also told him that we had accumulated a considerable amount of information we hadn't published. I let him know that I was aware of some of the difficulties he was enduring, and that it had all finally narrowed down to him and me. He addressed that subject, too, in his reply. Dear Maury, I have your letter of January 19th in front of me now, and I also have a receipt from the correspondence department informing me that you are now on my mailing list. But before we go any further, please let me explain a few things to you. I want to do this so that I don't get you misled and so you don't get your hopes up. Since I have been in Attica, I have progressed quite well, both emotionally and physically. Things are much different now than they were 2 years ago. Now I have a good job, friends, and I'm kept busy with plenty of projects. I type a great deal of the inmates' legal work, briefs, appeals, etc. This is a 24-hour job. I also write other letters for my fellow prisoners, since many of them cannot speak well on paper. Many haven't had the opportunities of a good education, like those on the outside. So, again, this keeps me busy. Next, I am kept busy writing to the governor and others in Albany with demands for the expansion of the Crime Victims Compensation Board and victims of violent crime in general. Perhaps I will let you read a copy of a lengthy letter I'm sending to Hugh L. Carey, the governor of New York. Just let me know if you want it. For my views of this new investigation, I have mixed feelings. I can also say that I am guilty of these crimes. You see, Maury, even if I could show you that I didn't do it all, I'd still be guilty of conspiracy in some of the cases. I'd even be guilty of second-degree murder in others. So, regardless, I would still have a long prison term, but this doesn't bother me. Next, I could safely tell you that One cult member, John Carr, is deceased, so this would leave me with only myself to share the guilt or proof of it. Berkowitz didn't know we'd already zeroed in on Michael Carr and several other suspects, but by itself, this statement said, for the first time, that John Carr was indeed an active, direct accomplice in the Son of Sam killings. Besides, many others have vanished, scattered about all over the United States of America, for all I know. So this leaves both you and me alone, once the dust clears. Furthermore, I am not a stool pigeon, and I cannot, no matter how heinous the crime, testify against another individual, even if a given individual has wronged me. Still, I must keep silent because of this code. This is our code, the inmates of Attica. I know this seems like something out of a gangster movie, but this place is my home now, and I will live by the rules and by the oath. I've made many friends here, believe it or not, and I have no wish for them to lose faith in me. Neither do I want to go back to court and go through this circus routine again. This was disgusting and stupid, so I just refuse to consider this. As for your questions, I can tell you that a rent-a-van place is located in the Bronx. It is on the corner of, here Berkowitz gave the exact location. A small van was rented and the price was almost $100. $50 as a safety payment and $38 or thereabouts in initial cost. Once the van was returned, the guy gave back the extra money, but I can't remember the exact prices. The van was rented for 1 day and then returned that following afternoon. Also, the owner, an average-sized Italian fellow, but heavy set in the middle, said that we had to fill up the gas tank too. It cost about $6 to fill the tank back up. The station also carried large trucks, smaller size vans, like the ones rented, and also hitching trailers. I'm sorry, but I don't know who was supposed to pull me through for that dog shelter job, which I applied for. I was just supposed to fill out the application and turn it in. By the way, did all of the things I said check out? All the details? Look, Maury, please don't knock yourself out over all this, as it isn't worth it. What's done is done and cannot be undone. So if you can't seem to go further, then I'll understand. Sometimes it just doesn't seem to matter anyhow. Sincerely, David Berkowitz. Attached to the letter was a map which provided step-by-step directions to the Bronx gas station. I sent another letter off to Berkowitz and arranged a meeting with the Queen's investigators. Just as Berkowitz's animal shelter letter was confirmed, so were pertinent details in these. All the information provided by Berkowitz about the Bronx gas station, the types of vans rented, their places, the deposit amounts required, the tank refill requirement, and the description of the owner was correct. There wasn't a single mistake or false claim. As for the apartment itself and the furniture disposal, the following was learned by me and Santucci's probers. Berkowitz said all the wall writing was done in red. It was, and color photo enlargement showed the writing to be fresh or not faded, and all of it appeared from the style of other factors to have been written at the same time. Moreover, a fair amount of the writing concerned Berkowitz's downstairs neighbor, Glassman, who hadn't even moved into the building until 5 months before the arrest. So it obviously wasn't written before then. Supporting that conclusion and the entire scenario was the fact that Queen's investigators early interviewed Narrow, was the fact that Queen's crap. And the entire scenario was the fact that Queen's investigators earlier interviewed a friend of Berkowitz's who told them he'd been invited to visit David 2 or 3 weeks before the arrest. The friend had to postpone the visit, but no one believed Berkowitz would have invited him to the apartment if the walls were then in that condition and all the furniture was gone. Berkowitz said the hole in the apartment was made shortly before his arrest. The plaster chips were indeed on the floor, as he said, and a neighbor, Edna Williams, whose apartment shared that common wall, said she heard the noise and noticed a resulting crack on her side of the wall within a short time of the arrest at about 5 a.m. Berkowitz said books, letters, etc., were left scattered about in a deliberate attempt to portray him as a lone, insane killer. Among the items were some bizarre notes claiming sole responsibility for the crimes. One note had been altered to backdate it 6 months. Berkowitz's personal address book also contained irrational listings, such as Sam's Secret Satanic Service, FALN's Secret Meeting Place, the Master. Those entries were haphazardly written in the first 9 pages of an otherwise neat, correctly alphabetized address book, and were interspersed with previously written, orderly, routine entries, and bizarre listings, and only those written with the same green felt marking pen. They were all done at the same time, Herb Leifer stated. Additionally, the FALN, the Puerto Rican terrorist group, had not been in the headlines between February and August 1977. However, in the first week of August, at the same time Berkowitz said the setup occurred. The FALN was in the news after a major bombing incident. In other words, the FALN could well be on the mind of someone writing that entry during the first week of August. Berkowitz said that he never had very much good furniture, and what little he had was removed and dumped in front of the Salvation Army building on Columbus Avenue, Route 22, in Mount Vernon in the pre-dawn hours. From Berkowitz's own father and others, Santucci's probers learned that David indeed had furniture at 35 Pine Street, including a couch, a large bureau or desk, a dining set, chairs, and a large stereo speaker and tape recorder he purchased in Korea. All of these were gone from the apartment when police walked in on August 10, 1977. As for the claimed disposal site of the furniture, the Salvation Army warehouse was located in an isolated section of Mount Vernon and on Columbus Avenue, as Berkowitz said. And that section of Columbus Avenue was also known as Route 22, just as Berkowitz stated. However, telephone directories listed only the Columbus Avenue address. That is, one had to have been there in order to know the details Berkowitz did. Moreover, Salvation Army officials confirmed that furniture was indeed occasionally left in front of the building overnight, as Berkowitz said it was. It didn't happen often, but it happens. What was obviously done about the scenario was that the loading and unloading of heavy furniture from the 17th floor apartment was not a one-man job. Not that Berkowitz said it was. It wasn't all my idea, and I'm certain you know this, he wrote. Santucci, Leifer, George Bird, and other Queens investigators and I all agreed Berkowitz was telling the truth about the great con the cops' apartment caper. All the details he provided were either confirmed outright or buttressed significantly by the investigators. Tom McCarthy said, someone could try to nitpick individuals' items here and there on the Son of Sam case, but the total picture, all the evidence put together, is overwhelming. From the crime scenes, North Dakota, to the confessions to Untermeyer Park, and the Son of Sam letters, and now Berkowitz's own admissions, which are backed up all over the place. That's almost exactly the way Berkowitz put it 4 months ago, I said. The evidence may have been mounting, but the list of suspects was reduced by 1 in late December. At the same time the Arliss Perry matter was opening up in North Dakota, the newly deceased Jerry Berg, a cult-connected friend of John Carr's Satanic associates, Berg Carr, and now deceased Donnie Boone, Phil Falcon, a person known as The Wiz, and a young man named Larry Milenko, comprised the inner circle in Minot. Jerry Berg, a short, stocky man with curly blondish hair, was a native of Bismarck who moved to the Minot area in the mid-1970s to take some courses at Minot State College, where Carr, Falcon, and some of the others also studied part-time. An accomplished outdoorsman, Berg had been on the wrestling team, and while at Bismarck Junior College, from which he graduated in 1972, he was 3 years older than Arliss Perry, who entered BJC in the fall of 1973. On December 27, 1979, Berg and Milenko were chopping trees in a wooded area outside Minot. According to Milenko, the pair had separated and were about an 8-mile apart. Milenko said the sound of Berg's saw stopped, and he then walked over to where Berg was working and found him crushed to death beneath a large tree. Milenko, ever respectable, then put the body in his truck, drove it to the hospital, dropped it off, and left. He immediately hired a lawyer. Berg was an experienced woodsman. He'd been in that business, Gardner said. It just seemed very strange to have something like this happen to him at all, let alone at the same time we're poking around John Carr and Arliss Perry. In searching through Berg's possessions, the police found further evidence of his satanic interests. In a letter Berg hadn't yet mailed to 2 friends in North Carolina, he said he was having difficulties with his brother and was thinking of putting a black magic curse on him. He also talked of looking up his black magic teacher, Aquarius Hador, who was now in Minneapolis. I'm sure he's as evil as he's ever been, Berg wrote. Ironically, he closed the letter by cautioning his friends to be careful in the woods. Police were never able to prove that Berg's death was a murder, but the toll of violently dead now included 4 who were directly linked to Berkowitz or the Son of Sam case: Jerry Berg, John Carr, Michael Carr, and Howard Weiss. Additionally, the Yonkers mailman who committed suicide a month after Berkowitz's capture, Andrew Dupay, was strongly suspected of having been threatened by the group, and then there were near-missed sniper attacks on Gardner and on the police officer substituting for Wheat Carr's husband, John McCabe, and the incident in which Darlene Christensen and Tom Taylor reported they were run off the road near Minot. There was no absolute proof that the latter incidents were released to the Son of Sam investigation, but strong indications were certainly present. Another incident, which occurred less than 2 weeks before Berg's death, was also highly suspicious. This one happened in New York. The letter I received said, Dear Maury Terry, please look into this double killing. Carol was asking people about the OTO a year prior to the murders. I can't accept that the people responsible for all this are still walking around free. I am afraid that the probe will not go away, and that I am afraid that the problem will not go away, and that minds this unbalanced may perpetrate additional horrors. Forgive me for not singing my name. I haven't gotten over the fear. The writer was apparently a woman friend, one of Carol Maron, 33, a Brooklyn resident. Maron was a secretary at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn and designed clothing to supplement her income. For 7 years, she lived with Howard Green, 53, an abstract painter who drove a cab for his steady paycheck. As the letter writer said, For more than a year, Maron and Green had been delving into the occult. Their small basement apartment at 720 DeKalb Avenue was spiced with various items of satanic significance. Chances are excellent that this paraphernalia was purchased at a certain occult store located not far from their residence, a store that served more purposes than one for certain cult adepts. In the early evening hours of Saturday, December 15th, Martin and Green were spotted by an acquaintance on a subway train in Manhattan. The friend left the train at 59th Street, but Maron and Green kept going. The subway they were riding would carry them past Columbia University before continuing to the end of the line at the Bronx-Yonkers border. Sometime later that night, Green and Maron returned to their Brooklyn apartment. The next day they were sighted was at 7 p.m. the following evening. They were lying next to each other off Route 80 in West Paterson, New Jersey, not far from New York City. Both were bludgeoned on their left sides, both had right eye wounds, and both clutched clumps of hair in their fists, a satanic symbol. There was one other similarity. Even drops of blood had been drained from their bodies of Carol Marone and Howard Green with a veterinarian syringe. It was definitely a satanic murder, said NYPD Detective Jim Devereaux, who was assisting New Jersey police with the investigation, and it wasn't a one-man job. For all my years in this business, I've never seen anything like this. That was precisely the point. The only murderous satanic cult I know of in the New York area is the Son of Sam group, I told Devereaux. But the NYPD won't admit it. It exists. We're stymied. Yet a vet's syringe is not a foreign object to people who deal with dogs, you know. If I get any more information that may help tie this in, I'll let you know. It would be more than 2 years before that information came my way. The Son of Sam probe was entering a new phase in the spring of 1980. A large stone of information was accumulated during the preceding 5 months, and before including data provided by Berkowitz, it was time to sort it all through. Berkowitz himself had quieted down. He wrote me several routine letters in the spring of 1980, avoiding additional specifics. Each time I responded by asking for relevant information, but it was apparent the earlier incidents had taken their toll, and he finally fell silent. Later, he wrote to say why. I received 2 interesting letters today, one from you and another from Lee. Well, I suppose I owe both of you an apology, really. This business with Piniak and the investigation has been causing me all sorts of trouble. The Queens District Attorney was at one time bugging my father. My dad was really scared because he sensed the intensity of the investigation and was also fearful for further embarrassment for his wife and himself. Don't forget what occurred after my arrest. Dozens of reporters flocked around him, tailed him to the local store, and camped out on his doorstep. 2. He was the subject of ridicule, hate mail, nasty phone calls, and terrible threats. So he is fearful of further publicity. Therefore, when the investigation turned to him, I just clammed up. Next, the authorities were attempting to locate my stepsister Anne, who lives out in California. She has had an awful life until recently, somehow has managed to pull her life together. Of course, she was fearful of the investigation because my father told her that the investigators inquired about her, so my dad again asked me to clam up, and there you have it. Well, I'm glad that you paid Lee back photocopying costs, and we'll soon be sending her materials, occult literature, and how both she and I are trying to pull ourselves together. I had this big hassle with this guy Piniak from the Associated Press. Berkowitz then described Piniak's dealings with Lee Chase, etc., and mentioned that McGraw-Hill was planning to publish Lawrence Klossner's so-called official book on the case. The results of McGraw-Hill's success could mean further harm to my father and more publicity as to my being a deranged madman. Oh yes, this is important. If either of you or anyone else receives a phone call from one Ira Joltak, please do not give him any information. He is my former defense attorney, whom I fired quite a while ago. I have heard that he has been seeking out information too. He is working with the author of the Tom McGraw-Hill book and is going to share in the profits. So he is out to silence me. He also attempted to do this a long time ago by trying to stop a press conference where Berkowitz repudiated his original demon story, which was and remained a central focus of that book. So please don't give him any info. Sincerely, David Berkowitz. This was to be the last I'd hear from Berkowitz for almost a year. Once again, we were on our own, but the we no longer included Jim Minigar, who bowed out of the investigation to obtain a full-time job to help support his family and to work on settling the debt he incurred as a result of his arrest and trial. Minot Gardner, Mike Knoop, Jeff Neese, and Jack Graham remained active in New York, Santucci's probe continued. Our own informal force of Pine Street irregulars kept checking new leads. Oh, I gotta read that again. Our own informal force of Pine Street irregulars kept checking new leads, and Detective Hank Sinodi prepared to face a police department trial. In March, Georgiana and I were married. Nearly 2 years after that night, we talked at the Serrani Esau murder scene. After a 9-day wedding trip to New Orleans and Cancun, Mexico, it was back to the rigors of the 44 investigation. Several aspects of the case had progressed markedly. In one instance, we obtained vital information about the yellow Volkswagen that fled the Stacy Moskowitz murder scene in Brooklyn. Several witnesses came forward after I published an article which revealed for the first time that a wild chase of that car had occurred after the shooting. An attorney, an NYPD police officer, and a restaurant employee all stated that Michael and John Carr had driven such a vehicle during the Son of Sam era. Their statements were forwarded to Santucci. Additionally, their statements were forwarded to Santucci. Additionally, the Cassara family in New Rochelle, at whose home Berkowitz lived in early 1976 before his move to Pine Street, told us, and Queens, that while at their home, Berkowitz had been driving a yellow-beige Volkswagen. Berkowitz had only his Ford Galaxy registered to him, so it was apparent he borrowed the VW. A private investigator, Jordan Stevens, also stated that the yellow VW was driven by both John and Michael Carr, but that it wasn't registered in either of their names. Stevens obtained this information from yet another witness who knew John and Michael. Stevens said the car was between 1970 and 1972 vintage and wasn't in great mechanical shape. The front bumper also hung down a bit. The NYPD officer who reported he was very familiar with the car said it was a 1971 model. Santucci observed, I think we can safely say that the VW was accessible to John and Michael Carr. The Candlelight Inn employee who threw Michael Carr, Berkowitz, and their friend Bobby out of the bar shortly before the sniper incident there in October 1976 also said, the yellow VW was outside the place, and they used to talk about leaving the inn and going over to Untermeyer Park. They never said why. I can see why they didn't. In fact, that a yellow VW was available to the Carr brothers did not mean that either of them was driving it the night. Oh shit, where'd I go? Oh crap, I gotta do the sentence over. The fact that a yellow VW was available to the Carr brothers did not mean that either of them was driving it the night Stacy Moskowitz was killed and Robert Violante blinded. In fact, it would soon come to light that neither John nor Michael was the Brooklyn gunman. At the same time, new evidence about other crimes peripherally linked to the Son of Sam case was uncovered. Specifically, the reports concerned violent acts in Westchester which Berkowitz first claimed to have committed alone. In the case of the firebombing of the Nito home in Yonkers, Sylvia Nito said she was awakened by voices just before the firebomb crashed into the front of their home in the pre-dawn hours of May 13th, 1976. I heard someone calling out, "Come on, come on, hurry up, hurry up." I heard someone call, "Oh yeah, hurry up." She said it sounded like the one voice was calling the other one Eddie, she added, but I'm not sure if it was Eddie. The wounding of the Carr dog in daylight on April 27, 1977 was another act Berkowitz took sole credit for, but two witnesses said otherwise. One told Queens investigators that he saw the shooter, who was a blonde-haired young man. Another witness was actually stopped near the scene by Yonkers police op. Oh crap! Another witness was actually stopped near the scene by Yonkers police responding to the shooting call. That man, who was walking his dog, said a man carrying a rifle from the aqueduct and passed right by him. The witness said the shooter was tall, thin, and had straight, fairly long blonde hair. The reports of the two witnesses jibed, and the person each described was not David Berkowitz, who didn't remotely resemble the man seen by the witnesses. From top to bottom, the Son of Sam case, as originally presented to the press and public, was in shambles. But even as this new evidence was being accumulated privately, Hank Sinoti went on trial within the New York City Police Department for months. I struggled with the notion of making some of Berkowitz's statements available to Sinoti's defense, but he demurred, saying that the case itself is more important. Keep it all quiet. I testified at the trial, as did Joe Basteri, who told the trial commissioner a true story of how Sinoti came to know of the North Dakota information about Carr and Reeve Rockman. Rick Piniak, reporting for the Associated Press, obtained a quote from the Deputy Chief Ed Dreher, in which Dreher, ignorant of all the evidence which had been uncovered, said for posterity, the Berkowitz case is closed. Berkowitz had no helper. I won't change that opinion. I don't think the department will. Sinoti, who faced dismissal from the force and a loss of benefits, was merely fined 30 days of vacation time and placed on probation for a year. It was effectively a partial victory for the moment, but after the media attention abated, Sinoti was removed from the detective ranks and assigned to a uniformed patrol in Lower Manhattan's 1st Precinct. He remained there long enough to reach his 20th year of service and retired from the force. All the while, he remained quietly involved in the investigation. Even on his way out of the NYPD, the department challenged his final year's overtime pay, upon which police pensions are partly based. Once again, Sinoti had to fight for his cause. He won. There were numerous issues to be dealt with in the probe. One of those concerned Arliss Perry. What did the North Dakota cult have to do with the murder of the young Christian newlywed in the church at Stanford University? As Berkowitz wrote, the case was very deep, and he rhetorically asked Lee Chase who killed Arliss Perry and why. He knew those answers, but we didn't. It was time to try and find out. And that's that's it for chapter 17.